I'm hoping everyone really enjoyed the last class when we did the Okinawan shoyu pork belly with the champuru, or the bitter melon. Really good classic dish, really good sort of a okazuya dish. Um, and I tell you, that was a really fun dish. And I got to eat that a couple days, and just really enjoy it. But I thought it'd be fun now to move on to something that's a little bit different. We've been doing a lot of local dishes and they've all been really fun and delicious, but I thought we'd make a transition sort of into the holiday season. And we talked about that last week. And so this week, what we're going to do is a roasted pork with caramelized apples. I'm going to show you guys how to make polenta, which if you've not had that before is really delicious and totally worth trying at least once in your lifetime. Um, and the apples, I think, will be fun because I want to show you how to do that with the pork. And then I'll also show you how to use that for sort of a dessert application. And we can also talk about different riffs on that. And so once I show you that, you know, you can use it and go in lots of different directions. And that's the fun thing about cooking. It's really learning certain foundational things and then being able to evolve them and do your own thing with them and take them in lots of different directions. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. Couple housekeeping notes, right? We love the feedback and the questions, so please don't hesitate to ask your questions using the, I always get it wrong, chat. Got it right today. Got it wrong, see? The Q&A function? The Q&A function, ask your questions and happy to get back to you. And again, if I don't know the answer, I have a lot of fact checkers in the room that can help me. And even if we can't get you an answer, then we can get back to you via email and all those other different modes of communication. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and get started, and why don't we go ahead over to the stove here. So the first thing I want to get started is the polenta, because that takes time to cook, and I want it to cook while we're doing the other things. And so what I'm starting with, as you can see here, I have stock here, and it's at a rapid boil. This is 5 cups, and I'm using stock because I'm always trying to build flavor, and I'm starting with a liquid that's flavored. Now, if you wanted to make a version that was vegan, you could make a vegetable stock, which would be perfectly fine, or you could just use water. Again, the difference would be like you don't get that same flavor. One of the things that I used to do sometimes would be I would take all of the corn husk and the corn cob in season when I was doing other dishes, say that, make a corn stock, and then I would make polenta with that. And again, you're building corn flavor on top of itself. And so that's really, really fun. I'm using, this is a particular brand, it calls it Golden Pheasant Polenta. It's basically cornmeal. And as you can see here, I'll show you the grains. For the polenta that I'm using here, it's pretty coarse relative to the like corn flour like used for corn muffins. This has got some pretty good body on here, okay? So I got this at a full boil, and there are a lot, if you guys do some research, you'll be like, there's people that say start with cold water, some people stay with hot water. I'm starting with the hot water, but you do need to make sure that if you're going to use the hot water or the stock boiling, it's about how you get the grains in. If I were to take this whole thing, or if I were to take, and it's all about like dry into wet, wet into dry, that question. If I took this liquid and I poured it into all this dry, what happens is the liquid starts to like go around all of this, and it starts to swell or congeal the starch around it, and that's how you get clumps. So I'm going to go dry into the wet, and I'm also going to keep whisking it because my goal is to make sure that as the pieces or the meal are falling in, each of the separate grains is then hit by the liquid and surrounded by the liquid, which then keeps it from clumping. So we're gonna go ahead and I'm starting my whisking, and I'm giving it some good height. I wanna give a chance to let the grains separate in the air before they hit the liquid. And so it does matter. See how I'm separating this out, and keep an eye on this. If it starts to really bubble up, just watch it because you don't want it to boil over. But see, again, I'm going at a nice height. I'm getting it all in here, pouring it in. As you can see, all of the grains all of the meal has gone in, and it's not stuck together because I poured it in at a height that lets them separate once they hit the liquid. Now I'm going to keep stirring this because you'll start to see it thicken. Now, once it's thickened, or starts to thicken, I will then turn the heat down very low and just let it cook till it's tender. Meaning when I put some of this in my mouth and I eat it, it's not crunchy. It's kind of like when you're cooking rice, right? The rice should have fully absorbed liquid, not be mushy like porridge, but it should not have crunch to it. Now, in the recipe that I said, again, I'm showing you how to do polenta, but you could do it rice, you could do it mashed potatoes, you could do wild rice would be great. If you're adventurous, you could do risotto. You know, if you're not really comfortable with risotto, even something like orzo, cook orzo pasta, and you can make a nice dish with it. I'm turning this heat down because, as you can see, it's starting to thicken. And the other thing I want to show you is if it's too hot, just pull it off, pull it away from the heat. You see how quickly the heat dissipated? Sometimes people think, oh, I gotta turn this down and keep on the stove. When we cook, we're always going off and on to control the heat. That's another way to control heat, okay?
Can you use just plain cornmeal?
You can use cornmeal. It's just gonna be a different consistency. This corn, the polenta is bigger. It's more coarse, so it gives the ability to have a little bit different mouthfeel. You can use cornmeal. I wouldn't use corn flour though. Like corn flour is too fine.
Okay, and why are you using unsalted butter?
Okay, so I'm using unsalted butter because salt, although is a seasoning, right? Salt is a preservative. And so technically, if you're buying salted butter, the butter is preserved, which gives it longer shelf life, which may, I didn't say it always, but it may be that you're not getting the freshest butter because unsalted butter doesn't have the same shelf life as salted butter. So by buying unsalted butter, you're getting fresher butter. But the other reason why I use unsalted butter is I want control over the seasoning. If I start with salted butter, I'm already putting salt in the dish, and then it gives me less control over how I'm seasoning the dish. So that's why we use it. So take a look inside in here. See how it's thickening up? So I'm gonna turn this down to I'm gonna turn this all the way down to low. And I'm gonna pull it off a little bit from the stove, off of the heat center, so that it continues to cook, but very slowly. And I'm gonna go this way, sorry. I'm gonna push it back a little bit because I'm gonna cook over here a little bit. But you see what I'm doing is it's still bubbling, so there's a heat source here, and I turn my stove down to low. So gradually what you're gonna see is the bubbles will dissipate and I will move it closer forward so that, again, I just want this gentle heat to allow the corn to absorb the liquid. But if it's going too quickly, it's gonna splatter and then you're gonna make a mess and then you risk getting burnt too. So see how gentle this is right now?
Is this something you can do in your rice cooker?
You know, you can try. I've never tried it in the rice cooker because this one I kind of like to see what's happening. I think you can try. I've never really tried that, but if you're willing to experiment, let us know how it works out. Okay, so we see how it slowed down quite a bit, but it's just a gentle. You want to be just a gentle, lazy bubble. Okay. So we'll let that cook, and we'll come check it every so often. And then we're gonna go ahead and move on to the pork dish. Again, I like to kind of keep my stove clean, but we'll let it do its thing over there. Okay, so for the pork roast, you know, I have a boneless pork butt here, and the nice thing about it is, you know, in Hawaii we love our pork butt, right? It's kalua pork, it's all kinds of things, but the thing about it, the reason why it's so good is because it has nice marbling. It's kind of fatty piece, and it allows you to roast it and cook it, and it's very forgiving. And it's as it pertains to you know, cuts of meat, it's a really great value. So this is what I'm gonna be using. Now you can use pork shoulder. You could do a pork loin, or you can do pork tenderloin. The thing about pork loin, if you're gonna do pork loin, it's a leaner cut, so you need to make sure you're really good about roasting it to the right temperature. If you're gonna use pork tenderloins, those are great too. Same thing. They're smaller, rounder, so you got to really nail your temperature. This one here, it's very, because of the fat and the marbling in here, it's very forgiving, and you don't have to get it perfect right on temperature wise to have a really delicious eating experience. Okay, so we'll start with this piece of pork, and let's see, I'll go in this bowl here. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in a mixing bowl. We'll put this on the side, and then we're gonna get all of our stuff to put on there to season it. So I have these are peeled garlic cloves, and they're really great. They're really convenient. These are my cut peeled garlic cloves, and so it's all peeled garlic, and it's just ready for you to use. And we'll go ahead and cut off the stems. Now, all of this is for flavoring and marinating this pork. So, you know, you can chop it fine, or you can go in there and just do just a very rough application. So I'm gonna go ahead and smash it with my cleaver.
Can you tell us the difference between pork butt and pork shoulder?
You're asking me what anatomy, and I didn't prep for that. I'm gonna get a bunch of fact checkers. The pork shoulder, I believe, is coming from this part of the pork right here, this section. The butt's coming from sort of off of the sirloin. So they're different parts of the pork that you're using. Okay, fact check me, everyone. Let's go. And it's just butt, but it's not actually the butt, by the way. Okay. Okay, so we'll have the garlic. We'll take the garlic, throw that in there. Rosemary. Now you can just take the whole piece, chop them up, throw it in there, or you can take these stems off like that. These pieces here, sometimes I'll smash them and throw them in there because there's still lots of flavor. But in this case, I'll take it off. Just rough chop this. You're looking for flavor on this, right? And so some of it depends on what you really want. Like, I'm okay with pieces of this on the outside when I'm slicing this roast when it's done. If you really don't want these kind of like, you know, if you think about a Christmas tree, right? Those Christmas tree needles, if it's too much, it's too coarse for you, then just keep cutting this finer. But I'm okay with it being sort of a rough chop. Goes in there. We want to put some, this is Italian parsley. You can use American parsley too, not Chinese parsley. I mean, you could use Chinese parsley, but this application is of a more a Western style, so I'm not going to use Chinese parsley. Now, technically, right, in all the cooking that I learned is you want to use the tender stuff. Stems are not good for marination. They're only good for like using to make stocks and sauces, and that can work. But what I've started to learn too is as you know, the idea that food waste is sort of an important thing. We want to try to minimize that to the extent that we can. I've started using the stems in a edible application because they're edible and they're not super woody. So I just chop them thin, and you're fine. We'll take the leaves here. By the way, if you were here, you would be like, wow, it smells like, it totally smells like, I think you'd think you're like, I don't know, upstate New York picking apples or something, because we've got all kinds of cinnamon and herb smells and garlic and vinegar, balsamic vinegar and lemon. It's just kind of this really nice smell in the house. Okay, so parsley. Okay. We'll do a quick wipe here. Salt. Be liberal with the salt. Envision that the salt has to go around the entire roast. And remember, when you think about surface area, it's going around the entire roast, but when you slice it, you want to make sure there's seasoning that's going to be part of this whole experience. Okay. Lemon. I have a little, this is my cocktail strainer, but it works great for making sure that the seeds don't get in here. And technically you got some seeds in here. It's all right. I'm also going to take these and drop them in here because it's flavor. Seeds out. Okay.
Can you tell us the purpose of the lemon?
Yeah, the lemon's going to give it good flavor. It's also going to give it some tenderizing. Acid is a tenderizer, so it's going to give us some of that tenderizing, but also it's going to help bring all of this complexity of flavor together. When you think about it, right? Like I told you, this thing, the pork is a fatty piece, and so you want that lemon to kind of cut some of that fat as you're eating it. Think about lemon. You put a shellfish. You put on a shellfish because it helps balance out the seafood, that seafood flavor. And then you want a bright note, so it's going to bring some bright notes to this, but it's also going to help tenderize and mellow out, make this whole thing come together. Okay, so pepper. I'm going to go in the coarse grind side.
Also, we like how your herbs got really fine. And is that because of your technique or because of the cleaver you're using?
I would say both. I mean, both of these knives would give you the same result, but the reason why they give me the result is because they're really sharp, and I keep them sharp. And so, when you're cooking at home, it's really worth it to learn how to keep your knife sharp, or even get one of those, those new ones, those things that have a V thing when you kind of run the thing through and keep it sharp. Sharp knife is not only going to give you a better cooking experience, but it's also safer because when you're working with a dull knife and you're pushing hard, that's where people they slip, and that's how accidents happen. Sharp knife goes right through it. So as you could tell, I wasn't putting much effort. It's because my knife is really, really sharp, and it's cutting through the herbs very, very quickly. And I don't know if you noticed it, but I would chop, and I would scope it around and remix it, chop, and remix. So you want to chop, bring it back together, chop, bring it back together, and that's kind of how you get that really, the consistency that you're looking for. Okay, so pepper, salt, 2 kinds of herbs, acid or lemon. Now, I put lemon. If I didn't have lemon, I would put balsamic could work. Maybe not balsamic. You could use balsamic, but maybe, let me take that back. You could put red wine vinegar. You could even put just distilled vinegar, champagne vinegar. What you want in rice wine vinegar, you want acid. And acid is going to give you the nice marination and going to give you those bright tones. And, when you look at recipes that like shrimp, I've seen shrimp recipes that like shrimp with Italian dressing. What is Italian dressing? It's a vinaigrette. It's fat, oil, acid, vinegar, and herbs and spices. And so when you think about that, if you've ever done that, this is what we're doing here. You're basically making a dressing, and all of that marination is going to help to flavor, tenderize, and also lightly cure the piece of pork that's going to bring all this flavor together. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just kind of rub this all together. Now, if you had time would work great. One thing that, when you think about this, what I'm doing here is, if I were to put garlic, distilled vinegar, and dried oregano, and olive oil, and salt, pepper, that would be the marinations for pernil, which is Puerto Rican roasted pork butt, which is delicious. If I were to take this same thing and I were to do garlic, bay leaves, peppercorns, vinegar, olive oil, then a lot of vinegar actually, and let it sit and almost pickle, that's the vinha doce, which is Portuguese pickled pork butt, right? So, these are all riffs, but basically the principle is the same. It's herbs or flavoring, spices, fat, and then we're gonna add let it marinate. Okay, so I'm gonna add some olive oil. Use a good olive oil. I have extra virgin olive oil here on my Cutty brand. I'm gonna put some on top here. And then basically what you're gonna wanna do is let it just marinate. Now, I'm doing this for you guys live on the show, but you wanna let this marinate overnight, even a couple days, because you really wanna give it time to all come together. So this is what it should look like. You'll also start to see it start whitening a little bit. And what that is that's the acid chemically, quote unquote, cooking some of the flesh here. And that's fine. You want it to do that. You should expect that, and that is okay. Okay. So you can put this in a wrap it, put it in the fridge overnight. One of the things I like to do is I'll throw this in a Ziploc bag, get all the air out, and then it's a much more compact marination, and it's all surrounded, right? Because right now, all of this is not being sort of surrounded by the olive oil. If I had it in a Ziploc bag tied up with all the air out, it would be completely evenly submerged in the marination, and it'd be really delicious. So this, you can let it sit for overnight, but I would, worst case scenario, at least give it 3 to 4 hours so that it can start to do its thing. But you start with this recipe and you can start doing your own things. You could add, cumin to it. You could add curry powder. You could add, I'm trying to think of other things that you can do to it. If you were to put, cilantro, ginger, garlic, a little bit of soy sauce, a little bit of sesame oil, you see how you're starting to change the filters on this thing, and you're going in a different direction. But conceptually, you're coming with a really great marination. You're letting it sit, let the flavor go in, and then you're going to go roast this. Okay, let's take a look at the polenta. You see how it's all come together now? So it's nicely coming together. I want to let it continue to absorb. Now keep in mind, when you're looking at this, if it's starting to, when you taste it, if it's still a little crispy, crunchy, because the grains haven't absorbed all the liquid and it's not ready, then you should just go ahead and add a little bit more stock. Now, I'm gonna add a little bit of water just because that's quickly available to me right now. Just a little bit, and then we'll let it continue to do its thing. Remember, we're gonna finish this with cheese and some fun stuff. So you don't want it to be too loose, because once you add the cheese, it's gonna get even more loose, okay? So now we're gonna move on to the apples. And this is a fun one. So let's go in the front here. We'll talk about apples a little bit before as we do this next process. Okay, so we'll let this thing marinate. Okay, so technically, right, pretend I marinated it. It's been a whole day. I take it out. I put it on a sheet pan. I'll throw it in the oven like 400 degrees. What did I say here? I said 400 degrees, right? Let it sear, oven sear. Then you drop it to a low temperature to let it cook very gradually, so that the muscle is not pushed so hard with the temperature, and it gradually cooks till it's nicely done. And then you pull it out, okay? So we'll let it sit for now.
Can you tell us how you put it in the oven? Like, do you put it on a rack? Do you put it in aluminum foil? How do you?
So I would just take a sheet pan, and if it's a regular oven, I may put a piece of foil so the pan doesn't get all messed up. I put it right in the pan. I preheat the oven, and it goes right in the oven. And depending on my oven, if it's like it has hot spots, every 30 minutes or so, I would rotate the pan to make sure it roasts evenly. But one of the things that I do a lot these days, and we've talked about this before, is I'll turn my grill on outside, full blast, and I'll do the same thing. Put it on a pan, wrap the pan in foil, put the roast on it, put it inside the oven. I mean the grill at high heat. And the reason I do that is because, when you're roasting, it gets all greasy in the oven. My grill, no problem, right? And basically, I'm quote unquote grill roasting it. Because I put on a sheet pan, the fat's not dripping into the grill and making all kinds of fire. But that really intense heat from the grill allows me to roast it and keep my kitchen from getting all smoky and my oven from getting all greasy. So you might want to try that. You might be happy with those results.
Do you cover the roast while it's roasting?
No, when you're doing the roast, you want to keep it uncovered. When you cover the roast, what you're doing is you're preventing that heat from surrounding it and searing it. You want it to be, and you also, if there's liquid in there, the covering of the roast will steam it. So uncovered, high heat. Now, if you get to a point when you feel like your roast is too dark, two things you do. One, you can drop the temperature of your oven so that it's slowly cooking and it's not searing anymore. But the first thing you can do really quickly that makes a difference is take a piece of foil, not cover the whole pan, but lightly just tent over the roast. It will shield it from the heat to prevent it from getting any darker. Okay.
And are you supposed to put it directly on the pan, or do you put something underneath it so it doesn't sit in its grease and fat?
If you want, you can put like a rack. I'll put it straight. I put foil and I put the roast straight on that piece of foil. And you know, from my perspective, a little bit of the grease and juice coming out is almost, it sort of bastes the bottom. Technically, what I should do is, as I'm roasting it, as the grease or the fats are rendering, take that and baste it. Like when you think about when you're doing a turkey at Thanksgiving, right? You're getting that juices and you keep basting it because it helps to give color and ensure juiciness on the turkey. So it's totally fine to go straight on there. You're okay if you're going to put it on a rack. It will separate the juices from, you know, the roast from sitting in that. But you know, these days, I think as we've evolved in our cooking techniques, with understanding how long it takes to do things and trying to keep things simple, I think you're fine if you just put it straight on a piece of foil. And for me, like, I'll put it in the foil so that I don't have to like soak and scrub the pan later. You know, so it's those are the different things you can.
And then do you need to tie the pork up because it's boneless?
Great question. So this pork butt, when I show you the one, it has a section where the H bone, where that bone is in there, was removed. So it has an opening. You can tie it. And that's the interesting thing. Like when I was trained how to cook, it was like there's no option. You must tie. And the reason you tie is to keep it together, and it helps to keep a more even roast. But you know, again, these days when I'm thinking about cooking at home and I want to get something going and I want something going quickly, I don't tie that. I don't trust chickens either, or I don't trust the turkeys. So it's like, you can. I think the question is, it's really about, do you feel like you get the incremental benefit of doing the tying and the roasting? I don't think that I think I'm okay. I don't think you do, but if you want to, you're totally fine to do as well.
Okay, and then finally, can you use the air fryer to do this?
You could try. I don't have an air fryer, so I'm not really versed in the air fryer, how well those work. But from my understanding, an air fryer is almost like a convection oven. So if it's big enough to accommodate a 3-pound roast and not lose temperature, then I think you should be able to be okay. And if it circulates the air really well, you should get good coloring. Or if you're a small piece, I think what you want to think about is the relative space, right? If you have an air fryer and your roast, you're like trying really hard to make it fit, probably not going to work. But if you have a, you know, smaller piece and it fits well in there and there's good circulation around it, the roast or the piece of pork, then I think you probably should come up with a decent experience. So and that's the thing about cooking, is experimentation that's involved, and some of it's give and take, and you try, and sometimes hopefully more times you hit, sometimes you miss, and you adjust, right? Maybe it doesn't come out right and you're gonna make curry stew out of it later, but there's always things that you can do with it. So okay, so the apples now, we're doing sauteed apples, and what I wanted to talk a little bit about is apples in general, right? So the cool thing about apples is that there's just so many varieties out there today, and you know, that's the fun part. Now, if I was making an apple pie, there's certain apples I would use and certain apples I would not use, and there's specific reasons. I would not use Red Delicious apples. I might not use Fuji. I would, on a pie, I would definitely use Granny Smith. I don't have one, but Golden Delicious. I think Honey Crisp would work too. This is an envy apple, and I think it would work well. And the reason why is you have to pick an apple that is going to hold up and not turn to just like mush when you bake it, right? So that's where I thought about when I was going to do the sauteed apples to teach you. Granny Smith's great, Honey Crisp is great, Envy's great. Now, the other thing that you want to think about is, if you really want to go the distance, right, is you start with a bunch of different apples, because it's about fun and complexity, right? Granny Smith, if you're familiar with these, they're a drier apple tart, right? This Envy has really nice sweetness in it. It's got good acidity. It's kind of a medium crunch texture. And then Honeycrisp is kind of in between the two, right? Texturally. But the fun thing about this is if you do the different apples, then when you're serving it, people are like, wow, this is like, what is this? What's going on here? And you can say, well, it's this very cool ambrosia that I did. So quickly, I'm just going to cut the tops off of the apples. And I'm going to use one of each for this so I can build some complexity. And by the way, I'm heating a pan up so that hopefully it's nice and ready to go when we're ready to go. Then I'm going to take my peeler and just peel it like that. I will say, let's see what happens. I don't think let's see. I used to really enjoy watching my grandmother, actually my great grandmother, right? When I was a kid, she would peel apples for me, and the game was always to see if you know, we could do it in one peel. So let's see if I can do this. This is for you, Nana. Let's see if I do it. All right, so, okay. But again, this works really great too, right? I love. And you'll feel, if you're gonna do these, right, you'll totally feel the difference in the texture and firmness of the apple, okay? Okay. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'll cut these apples into quarters. And you can use a paring knife or utility knife. You want to cut that core out. Now, if you have an apple core, great, right? You'll be done already. You beat me. But if you don't have an apple core, I wanted to show you guys how to do this too. Process would be the same if you're gonna make apple pie. This is kind of how you go through the apples. Or, you know, if you have someone that you're doing apple wedges for and they don't like seeds and they don't like skins, this is how you make the wedges for them, right? And if you're not comfortable with that, you know, don't hesitate to do this too. Now, keep in mind, the difference is, right, if you're doing what I'm just showing you, you see how much the difference, you're not gonna get the same yield, right? You do get some more loss because you're just cutting a bigger hunk out of the apple, but it achieves the same goal. And again, if you're starting out at cooking and you're just not really comfortable with the knife and you're getting used to it, you still can get a good result. Now, if you're gonna let's say you're gonna do this and you wanted to get ahead, as you might notice, is over time apples, if once you cut them, they will oxidize, they'll turn brown, and you don't want it to turn brown. You can put them in lemon water, and that will help from turning color. The only thing that I would say is in this application, I recommend that you don't do that, merely because water is gonna make it harder for the apples to caramelize, because once you put the apples in a pan, if you know, the water will steam and then you lose all that heat. So one of the other things you can do, which we used to do in restaurants all the time, when I was caramelizing apples ahead of time and I wanted to do them in a way that I could get ahead and prep, is I would melt butter and I would toss them in melted butter, because what you're trying to do is seal the apple from oxygen air, which is oxygen. And by tossing them in melted butter, you're doing the same thing. You're actually putting a skin around, like a layer of fat around the apple, which prevents it from the oxygen from oxidizing the apples. So that's one thing you can do. Okay, so here are our apples. I've got the pan here that's been heating up. I'm gonna come take a look here. I'll show you our polenta. And see, the polenta is gonna continue to keep absorbing liquid, right? So right now, I think we're good. I have the warmer on, so I'm gonna move it on the back on the warmer side so that I can go. But I'm also got my pan hot here, and then we're gonna go ahead and add some butter to it. I turned my pan to high now. I've been heating up in sort of medium, but I really want to get this thing going now, okay? One thing I wanted to mention is what I want to show you how to do is almost the same thing that you would do if you were gonna make like cherries jubilee or banana squash. So the approach is very similar. Like, you've been to a restaurant where you see them do all these flamed desserts. They typically start with butter, they put the fruit in, spices and herbs, possibly sugar, toss, alcohol, flame, and then it goes on the ice cream. So that's kind of what happens. Now, this is one of those desserts, again, like someone shows up at your home and you didn't expect them, and it's like, oh, we're having dinner. Okay, so I gotta think of a dessert. This is one that works really, really good. So now the butter is stopping to foam. It's kind of like lightly browning. I'm gonna add the apples here. Now again, you don't want to overcrowd the pan, because if you overcrowd the pan, the heat will drop too quickly and you won't caramelize the apples. You start to steam them. So I want just a layer on the bottom of the pan. And if you have to do 2 batches, then so be it, right? But we'll let these cook. Let's see what we got here. I'm gonna check the polenta while these are. See what I'm doing? They're nice and foaming and browning, so they're happy. I'm gonna taste this polenta, see if it's done. And it's tasting really good. Now, I want to get this polenta just right. While these are doing their thing, little salt. I turn my grinder to fine. We'll put some pepper in there. Okay, let's see what we have here. I'm gonna toss these. Ready? See what we got. Okay, you see how they're nicely browning? And they're browning because that butter, the dairy in the butter is helping to brown them, but I have the pan nice and hot. I did not overcrowd the pan, and the apples were dry, okay? The next thing we're gonna do while that's happening is we'll go ahead and we'll add some goat cheese to our polenta. Well, let's see what happens here. See how it's nice and browning? Well, look at that. That's looking good. See that caramelization? Caramelization is the sugars in the apple, and that's going to give a really good flavor. Let me add some goat cheese now to the polenta while these are cooking. And we'll melt it. It's basically, if you envision, like, if you think about like putting butter in here, that's what you're doing, okay? Now, if you don't want to put goat cheese, you could also put a little bit of heavy cream. You can grate Parmesan cheese in here. There's a lot of ways you can go with this, but this is going to cream it out and make it nice and rich. So let that sit there for a second. Okay, you see how that caramelization? Wow, look at that, it's coming together. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some brown sugar. I'm adding light brown sugar. If you have, if you want more of a sort of a molasses character, you can add dark brown sugar. But what I want the sugar to do, it will start to melt in here, and it's going to help to start to make sort of a nice sauce here. Okay. So while that's happening, I'll finish this up here. And that's looking good. Now, again, depending on what you want, if you want that to be smoother, you could add some stock, or you could even add a little bit of heavy cream to that, or you could add a little bit of some milk, which would also help smooth it out, or butter. Okay, so we'll let that sit there. So you see how the brown sugar is now melting and it's making a caramel. And the question now is, now the texture of the apples, I want them to be cooked, but I don't want them to be mushy. Okay, so it just doesn't take very long, and they're almost done. So I'm turning the pan off now, and I'm gonna add some lemon juice. One of the things that you're gonna learn as we cook more and more together, and as you watch the videos that we do, is acid. When you cook, it's about sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. And salt and pepper are great seasonings, but quite often when I cook and when you see chefs cook, is they're gonna add a splash of vinegar or a splash of even white wine. In this case, I'm adding lemon because that's gonna bring some sharpness and add corners to the dish.
What do you mean by add corners to the dish?
Let me give me a second. I'm gonna add some butter here, and as you can see, I pulled it off the heat because I want the butter to melt in here and basically emulsify to make the sauce versus melt and separate. When I'm saying adding corners, right? Like when maybe you've heard the term when someone says that, you know, they tasted something and it's sharp. It's that kind of I'm trying to describe it. It's that when you put something in your mouth and you taste something, right? First, you hit salt, that gives you, and salt and acid kind of bring savory and mouth-watering consistency together. It's almost like if you're familiar with lihing, right? When you think of lihing mui, if I say the word, or if I say ume, and your mouth starts to water, that's that sharpness. Or when you think about that tart, puckery experience you get, that's the sharpness that I'm talking about. And so in good cooking, when you start to think about food, and you start to be mindful about things, you start to realize that acid is very important because it brightens a dish. And so that sharpness brings this liveliness to the dish. And when you think about even orange chicken or sweet sour, it's not just the sweet, it's a sour, which has that sharp kind of tartness that brightens or brings the dish alive. So here we have our apples, and I think that's looking great. And so basically what you have now is you have a wonderful apple dish here. And see on that stuff on the bottom, that's caramel, butter, lemon. Now, if you wanted to kick it up a notch, you can put a little bit of little bit of vanilla in there. You can put some cinnamon there. There's lots of ways you can go with this. So we've got our apples here. The next thing we're going to do quickly is let's bring that polenta. I'll bring the polenta forward here, and we'll finish that. As you can see here, see how it's looking together. It's coming together now. I think it looks great, but I think it's still a little bit tight. When I say tight, I mean it's a little stiff, right? So I wanna put a little bit more cheese in here. So you can't go wrong with a little bit extra cheese. And then we'll stir that in, which will add more flavor. You see how it's like stiff like that? And I don't want it to be that stiff. It's too stiff. So I am gonna come in here, dig around into my pantry, and I have some heavy cream. Again, if you don't want to put dairy, that's fine. You can put more, you can put some stock in there or liquid. But I'm trying to richen this up, right? Because, you know, in Hawaii outside right now, it's probably maybe 78 degrees. And for us, that's kind of like wintertime. So I want something that's gonna stick to my ribs and make me really happy. Same thing, think about it. I have corn, I have stock, and it's all rich. So I am also gonna add a squeeze of lemon to this. which will help bring some brightness to the dish. But also, I'm gonna take some parsley here. See how I keep doing this? I'm rolling it, right? I keep mixing it together. Okay. I'm gonna go in.
What does this do to the dish?
Color. It will give color, but also when you think about parsley, right? It has a sort of that chlorophyll, gives it a light, very, very mild bitterness, but also helps to bring liveliness to the dish versus all of that richness that I already put in here, right? When you think of all that cheese and cream that's in there, the parsley will help to cleanse all of that richness with the lemon. Now, if you wanted to, you could put some cumin in this. You could also put some heat if you like heat. Put some chili flakes in here, jalapeno. You know, there's a lot of different. If you did go the route of starting to put things like cilantro in here, with cumin, lime juice, you start to take it starts to take on a different personality, right? And that's the fun thing about cooking. So this is the polenta. And again, when we cook, we like to garnish, right? So I'll take some of my parsley, put it on top there. I'm gonna just add a little bit of salt there. If you have sea salt, that would be even great. Little pepper. Really take some really good olive oil. Drizzle some on top. Grate some Parmesan cheese on there. Be really, really great too. So we've got our apples. We've got the polenta there. That's looking really, really good. You know, I might even take a couple of pieces of a couple of big pieces of parsley and just kind of throw it on top there. Just kind of like really helps it look delicious and pop. Okay, now the next thing we're gonna do is we want to kind of finish up with the pork, right? So when you weren't looking, I took the pork that we were marinating, I threw it into the oven, and actually it might be a little hot right now. And I roasted it, like I said. I took it, I put the pork on a piece of foil on my pan, put it in the oven, and I roasted it. I started at 400 degrees, let it roast, dropped it down, took it to an internal temperature of about 145 to 150, and I let it rest so that it can relax. And that's what your roast looks like. So now what I want to do is we'll slice some of it, and then we'll bring everything together. As I'm starting to bring everything together, are there any last questions that I can answer? I'm also just patting it real quickly just to kind of get some of that juice off. Go ahead, sorry.
The apples look delicious, but they look like they're for dessert. Could you serve it with vanilla ice cream?
You should ask that question. I'll show you something after we finish this. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and slice some of this.
Did you put this one in the grill or in the oven?
I actually did this one on my grill but it would still look fabulous if I did put it in my oven. But I wanted you to see what this looks like.
What about all those the delicious pan drippings? Can you use that for something, or do you pour it over? Oh, okay.
So it's 1 piece of that. We'll put this. I put a plate here. Now you could just put all the sliced pieces in there. I like to always kind of like put the roast here so people can see that. Put some of the slices here so they can see that, right? which is, I think, really, really nice. And then I'll take some of these apples. Now, when you think about it, right? I don't know if you're like, how many of you eat pork chops with applesauce? Right? What we're doing is we're making pork with applesauce, but you know, this is like the grown-up version. So we'll have your apples. You can put the garnishes on there. You can serve it on the side. You can put some for garnish. Take some of this sauce here, like drizzle it on the top like that. Then the drippings that you're asking about, right? Take some of that, and there's some fat in here, so you got to be, you know, it's up. If you're, I think it's great, but that's a personal decision you got to make. But we'll put some of that on here. Kind of wipe the plate here. Again, garnishes, right? It's all about, it's not all about, but garnishes are a very important piece of presentation. So we'll put some rosemary here to make it look nice. I'm gonna wipe the inside of the pan just a little bit. So we have, you know, this is our roast with apples, caramelized apples. And this is a nice family meal. You can serve it like that, or you can plate it, but it's really good for, you know, a nice holiday get together. We've got a soft polenta. You can do family style. And it's really delicious. Now, the last thing that I do want to show, because someone asked, and I'm glad you asked, because I think it's one of the things I love to do when I'm having when I have guests over, is take this dish here that's apples, and then you can make a really, really great dessert out of that. So I'll show you guys how to do that real quick. Find a plate for that real quick. Here we go. So let's say, you know, you do that, that becomes part of your repertoire. I've got some Rosalani ice cream here. It's nice. It's from Maui, vanilla bean, awesome stuff. Take some of this out. By the way, this apples that I showed you works great with pears, works great with quince. You can do it with persimmon. So there's a lot of ways you can go with that, right? You can also do like apple bananas. That works great too. That's like bananas foster. If you're gonna do bananas foster, you do the same thing, but you hit it with a little bit of some Grand Marnier. But you make sure the bananas, don't use really ripe bananas. You can use bananas that are almost a little bit underripe, because the cooking is gonna make them soft and fast. But that's a real simple, quick dessert. And then it's about working with what you got, right? So if you happen to have, like, you know, nuts at home, or I happen to have some granola, put some on top of there like that. You know, it's really about working with what you have and dazzling people, right? So here, I got some shortbread cookies. We'll put it on there. You have some berries that will look great. Some, you know, if you have whipped cream, caramel sauce, but I think you guys get the sense of this. But this is a really fun dessert. Simple thing you can do. It tastes delicious, but what's really great about it is, again, the dish you made came from you, and it's homemade. And so really, really kind of a fun dessert that you can do. And so there we have it. But you know what I did? I said, we need some kind of we kind of just have starches. So I also made just I took a butternut squash, an acorn squash, sectioned it out, threw some balsamic vinegar, salt, pepper, roasted it really quickly. But now we have a really nice fall dinner. So we got acorn squash, roasted pork loin with sauteed apples, goat cheese polenta, and you have a nice also dessert that you can work with if you were gonna do, you know, you do the pork without the apples, save the apples for the dessert, or, you know, you could do a different kind of fruit. So here we have our nice kind of like fall cozy dinner for the weekend. And I hope you enjoyed that. Any last questions?
What drink would you pair this with?
Ooh, good question. You know, what's that? What's that apple cider that like an apple? Not the reds might be interesting, but a really good like a Gewürztraminer would be really good, or an Alsatian Riesling would really be delicious. You could probably do really well with a nice Chardonnay, but not one that's not too oaky. Or if you wanted a red wine, Pinot Noir would be great with this. Something maybe from Sonoma. Definitely anything from Burgundy would be really, really great. But a lighter, crisper red or a nice high acid white, I think would be really great with with this dish here, because that acidity you want to cut through the richness here and not to overpower the apples. And the red, you don't want something that's so heavy that it masks the entire meal that you have here. Anything else? All right, so just like final notes. You know, as we are going into the holiday season, this is as we wrap up this calendar year, this is the last class that we're going to be doing. Keep checking in with us though, because we will be shooting videos that we'll be posting on the website that really feature more of our Foodland 5 recipes, more local dishes, and lots of holiday things, desserts, savory dishes as well, so, and local dishes. So there'll be lots of content for everyone here. And then we'll look forward to seeing everyone into the new year. So have a great Halloween and the rest of the holiday season. Have a great kind of a wind up to 2021. And we look forward to seeing you all in 2022. Thanks, everyone.